In this video, we're going to go over how the fixed positioning in CSS works. Okay, so in our code editor, which we have here, if you can remember, in our last video we talked about absolute positioning, but in this video we're going to be talking about fixed positioning. Now there are some difference between them, so that is what I'm going to be showing you in this video. So you can see we have about 5 divs. We have 5 div. You can see div 1, div 2, div 3, div 4, and div 5. Okay, starting from the first div over here. Now our first div is a fixed element. We have position of fixed, so this is our first div. And now, just like the position of absolute, you also need these two attributes. You also need the top, and you also need the left. Okay, just like the position of absolute over here, you need the top and you also need a left. Okay, you need those two properties for a fixed positioning to work. Okay, and now for you to understand how this fixed positioning works, you need to use it against an element that is positioned absolutely. Okay, you need to use it against an absolute positioned element, okay, for you to be able to understand it. So that's why we have our first div. Our first div is a fixed element, and our second div is position absolute. Our third div is position absolute. Our fourth div is position absolute, and our final div, which is the fifth div, is also positioned absolute. Okay, so the only fixed element here is our first div. Is this div. That is our only fixed element, is this div over here. The rest are positioned absolute. So I'm going to be giving you example on how this fixed element works. Okay, now let's go over to our web page. So these are the div. The first div, our fixed div, have a background color of green, and the rest of our absolute positioned div, they have a background color of red. Okay, so now I want to give you an example of this fixed element and also how it works. Okay, now we gave it a top of 10 pixels and a left of 10 pixels, background color of green and color white. So now let's go over to our web page and refresh this. I want to give you an example of how the fixed element work, the fixed positioning. So let's resize the browser for you to understand how this fixed element works. Like I have said before, you will need to use it against against an absolute position element. Okay, so now let's resize this browser. Now let's resize this. Let's just bump this up here. You can see, and now you can see this scroll bar on the right hand side. Now let's scroll this. You can see, are you seeing that? You can see our first div, which is our fixed positioned div. You can see it's not moving because it is fixed. So that is the difference between a fixed element and an absolute position element. You can see as I'm scrolling this, you can see it is fixed. It is still staying there. It's not moving no matter what. So that is the fixed element. You can see the position absolute div, they are moving, but the fixed position element is not moving. It's still there. Our green div, you can see, is still there. It's not moving. So that is how the fixed position element works. Okay, I don't really use the fixed position element, but there will come a situation where you need to use it. If you go to some websites, there are some websites where they position a particular element because they don't want that element to move. Okay, but as for me, I don't really use the fixed element. I normally use the position of absolute. And there is also one more value you can use after the position, and it's called the relative. Okay, there is also a position of relative, and that is for a more advanced CSS. So we are going to be talking about that in future tutorials. Okay, there is also a position of relative. We're going to be talking about that in future tutorials, but this is how the fixed position element works. The position of fixed, So that is how it works. It's different from the position of absolute. You can see the example we gave, it doesn't move anywhere. When you give an element a position of fixed, the element will remain there, it won't move. Okay, so that is a difference between a position of absolute and a position of fixed. Okay, yeah, so that will be it for this video, guys. I will see you guys in the next video.